Today, I finally do my first season prediction for a group of 5 team. It's going to be Cincinnati at Indiana. Let's go. Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's me again, Golden Blue Dude, and if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. What I do is college football videos every single day, and with the season getting closer and closer, I'm in full preseason prediction mode. Today is going to be Cincinnati at Indiana. First, we'll do Cincinnati. Let's start with their offense. The only thing that Cincinnati loses on the offense is their 2 starting tackles on the offensive line, so they will have to figure that out. Everything else is intact, and it all starts with the quarterback Desmond Ridder. Last year, he was 186 for 281, 66.2%, threw for 2,296 yards, 19 touchdowns, and just 6 interceptions. To go along with that, he is a dual-threat quarterback, 98 carries for 592 yards, that's 6 yards a carry, and 12 touchdowns. He is arguably the best quarterback in the group of 5 teams. So his ability to tuck the ball and run, combined with the running backs, provides Cincinnati with a great running attack. Here's their running backs. Running back Jerome Ford, 73 carries for 483 yards, 6.6 yards a carry, and 8 touchdowns. His backup is Ryan Montgomery, 15 carries for 41 yards, 2.7 yards a carry, and he's also a pretty good punt returner. Let's take a look at the Bearcats' passing game. They have a great quarterback. What about their tight ends and wide receivers? Tight end Leonard Taylor, 16 receptions for 191 yards and 1 touchdown, and they have a great wide receiving core. Wide receiver Alec Pierce, 17 receptions for 315 yards and 3 touchdowns. Wide receiver Trey Tucker, 18 receptions for 236 yards and 3 touchdowns. Wide receiver Michael Young Jr., 29 receptions for 332 yards and 3 touchdowns. Wide receiver Jordan Jones, 13 receptions for 157 yards. Wide receiver Tyler Scott, 3 receptions for 20 yards. And wide receiver Jaden Thompson, 6 receptions for 58 yards. Cincinnati will have the best offense in the group of 5 and probably a top 10 offense in the nation. People forget about Cincinnati's defense. They have a great defense as well. I think hands down they have the best defense in the group of 5, and that's including Tulsa. And really, besides losing 2 of their safeties, everybody else is coming back. So the front 7 is going to be good, and the secondary is going to be lethal. Let's start off with the front 7. The defensive line. The defensive end Sanders, 31 tackles, 22 by himself, 7 sacks, and 5 pass deflections. Defensive end Jawan Briggs, the Virginia transfer, 20 tackles, 5 by himself, and 3 sacks. Defensive end Malik Van, 16 tackles, 12 by himself, and 2 sacks. Defensive tackle Curtis Brooks, 26 tackles, 18 by himself, 2.5 sacks, 1 forced fumble, and 2 pass deflections. Now the linebackers. Linebacker Darian Beavers, 58 tackles, 38 by himself, 2.5 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 2 interceptions, and 2 pass deflections. Linebacker Joel Dublanco, 51 tackles, 32 by himself, 1 sack, 1 forced fumble. And linebacker Ty Van Fossen, 28 tackles, 19 by himself, and 2 sacks. So yeah, that front 7 gets to the quarterback a lot. Every one of those guys had at least 1 sack. Now let's talk about the secondary. It's going to be pretty stinking good as well. They have plenty of experience and great depth. Defensive back Arquan Bush, 20 tackles, 12 by himself, 2 interceptions, and 3 pass deflections. Cornerback Ahmad Gardner, 28 tackles, 16 by himself, half a sack, 3 interceptions, and 6 pass deflections. Quarterback Kobe Bryant, 35 tackles, 31 by himself, 1 forced fumble, 4 interceptions, and 7 pass deflections. And even though they lost 2 of their safeties, they still have great safeties. Safety Brian Cook, 26 tackles, 19 by himself, 2 pass deflections. And safety Javon Hicks, 13 tackles, 9 by himself, 1 forced fumble, and 2 pass deflections. So Javon Hicks had sort of a down year last year, but in 2019 he was a monster. So if he can go back to that form, he's going to be great. Cincinnati could easily pass as a Power 5 powerhouse, and I do think they will be a legitimate threat to make the playoffs. Here's a look at their schedule. First up, Miami of Ohio, win. Murray State, win. At Indiana, I'll predict that game later. They get their bye week at Notre Dame. I think that's a win. I think Cincinnati is better than Notre Dame, and Notre Dame's home field advantage is not that great. Temple at home, that's a win. UCF at home, that's a win. At Navy, that's a win. At Tulane, that's a win. They get Tulsa at home, that's a win. At USF, that's a win. SMU, win. At East Carolina, win. So depending on my Indiana prediction, I have Cincinnati going either 11-1 or 12-0 in the regular season. And yes, they do have 2 back-to-back tough road trips, but it sets up nicely because they have at Indiana, then they get the bye week, and then at Notre Dame. So that fits perfectly. By the way, Cincinnati's preseason ranking is number 8 State. Last year they went 9-1, first in the AAC. Their only loss, a close loss to Georgia in the bowl game, and Georgia was at their best. Now let's look at Indiana. Their preseason ranking right now is 21. They were 6-2 and second in the Big Ten East last year. They do return 17 starters, so that is a big plus. Let's start with their offense. They do have a key loss, running back Stevie Scott III. 4 of their 5 offensive linemen are back. However, last year that was Indiana's weakness. So if their offensive line can improve from last year, they'll be even better. The head coach for Indiana, Tom Allen, he is already being rewarded for last year's success. Indiana increased his salary to $5 million a year until 2027. Now the big question for Indiana's offense is quarterback Michael Penix Jr. His health. He has to stay healthy. Speaking of which, here's his stats. Quarterback Michael Penix Jr. Last year, 124 for 220, 56.4%. That needs to go up. 1,645 yards, 14 touchdowns, just 4 interceptions. Dual threat quarterback. But last year he was hampered by injuries. He's been much better than these stats. Last year, 18 carries for just 25 yards, 1.4 yards a carry. In 2018, he averaged 6.4 yards a carry. In 2019, 5.4 yards a carry. So if he can get back to that, Indiana's offense is going to be very dangerous. Here's a look at their running game. Former 4-star recruit and USC transfer running back Stephen Carr, 46 carries for 176 yards, 3.8 yards a carry, and 2 touchdowns. By the way, they're very deep at the running back position. Running back Samson James, 32 carries, 96 yards, 3 yards a carry. Running back Tim Baldwin Jr., 22 carries, 141 yards, 6.4 yards a carry. And running back David Ellis Jr., 16 carries for 61 yards, 3.8 yards a carry. Here's a look at their passing game. First, the tight end, Peyton Hendershot, 23 receptions for 151 yards and 4 touchdowns. The wide receivers. Wide receiver Miles Marshall, 19 receptions for 290 yards, 1 touchdown. Wide receiver Ty Freifogel, 37 receptions for 721 yards and 7 touchdowns. Wide receiver DJ Matthews, Florida State transfer, 36 receptions for 335 yards and 3 touchdowns. That was stats from 2019 because he sat out last year. Wide receiver Javon Swinton, 4 receptions for 52 yards. And wide receiver Jacoby Hewitt, 5 receptions for 68 yards. Indiana has plenty of depth, but all eyes will be on their quarterback. He has to stay healthy. Now let's take a look at Indiana's defense. Indiana does have a super deep defense. Their scheme is a 4-2-5 scheme. Key loss, free safety Jamar Jackson. I will say their front 7 needs to improve against the run. However, I do think their defense will actually be better than what it was last year. Starting with their defensive line. Defensive end Ryder Anderson, transfer from Ole Miss. Pretty good transfer. 42 tackles, 18 by himself, 2.5 sacks, 1 pass deflection. Defensive tackle DeMarcus Elliott, 14 tackles, 9 by himself, and 1 pass deflection. The other defensive tackle, I'm not even going to attempt to say his last name, so I'll just call him Siwo Nofo. 12 tackles, 5 by himself, 1 pass deflection. Defensive tackle Weston Kramer, Northern Illinois transfer, 17 tackles, 4 by himself, and 1 sack. Linebacker defensive line hybrid DK Bonham, 15 tackles, 11 by himself, and 1 sack. And hybrid defensive linebacker Jaron Handy, the Auburn transfer, 3 tackles, 2 by himself, 1 sack, and 1 pass deflection. Now here's Indiana's linebacking core. This core is filled with talent, starting with linebacker Micah McFadden, 58 tackles, 44 by himself, 6 sacks, 1 interception. Linebacker Cam Jones, 35 tackles, 24 by himself, 3 sacks, and 3 pass deflections. Linebacker Marcelino McCrary Ball, 47 tackles, 29 by himself, 2 sacks, and 1 pass deflection. I do think Indiana's secondary could be one of the best in the Big Ten, starting with the cornerbacks. Reese Taylor, 29 tackles, 25 by himself, 1 sack, 1 forced fumble, 1 interception, and 7 pass deflections. On the other side, cornerback Tywan Mullen, 38 tackles, 27 by himself, 3.5 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 3 interceptions, 2 of those he returned for a touchdown, and 3 pass deflections. And then the safeties. Strong safety Devin Matthews, 40 tackles, 26 by himself, 1 sack, 1 interception, and 6 pass deflections. Free safety Raheem Lane, 30 tackles, 28 by himself, and 3 pass deflections. That was from 2019 because he did sit out last year. So their secondary is going to be legit. That front half of their schedule is brutal. Let's take a look at it. First off, at Iowa. I think that's a loss. Iowa's going to be tough, and Iowa has a tremendous home field advantage. They get Idaho at home. That's a win. They get the home game against Cincinnati. I'll predict that here in just a minute. At Western Kentucky, that's a win. At Penn State, I think that's a loss. I think Penn State has a big bounce back here, and it's at Penn State. Tough road test. After that, a bye week. And they get Michigan State at home. That's a win. They get Ohio State at home. That's a win. Ohio State fans are not happy with that prediction. That's the way I see it. And at Maryland, that's a win. At Michigan, that's a win. Rutgers at home, that's a win. Minnesota at home, that's a win. And then at Purdue, that's a win. So I do have Indiana finishing on a 7-game winning streak. So they'll either finish 9-3 or 10-2, depending on the Cincinnati, Indiana prediction. Here we go, the game prediction between Cincinnati at Indiana. This could end up being one of the best games of the entire season. Indiana's biggest concern, like I said, on offense is Michael Penix Jr.'s health. I think by this time he might be a little beat up. And I think Cincinnati's balanced attack, they're great at running the ball and passing the ball, will have that Indiana defense guessing. It is at Indiana, that's going to help, but I actually see Cincinnati going to Indiana and beating them. So then they'll get a bye week and then going on the road and beating Notre Dame. So yes, I have Cincinnati going undefeated. And if they win the AAC Conference Championship game, Cincinnati has a chance to make the playoffs. Now for Indiana, I have them going 9-3. That's still a great season. And it's all because of the front half of that schedule. It is brutal. So going 9-3 is great at Indiana. I know you want to get a double-digit win season. I just don't see it happening this year because of those road trips to Iowa and Penn State, and then I have you losing at home to Cincinnati. But 9-3 is going to be great. You're going to have a good bowl game, and we'll see what happens next year. So people better take Cincinnati serious this year. They are going to be a very dangerous team and a legitimate threat to make the playoffs. That's all I got for you for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.